we're hearing what we hear about climate change. What does the average person not know that's going on?
An awful lot.
Specific to climate change.
Okay, specific to climate change. Well, I would say the biggest thing that they don't know is the degree and extent and frequency with which climate has changed naturally over and over and over again. I mean, I would say this. Okay, so explain to me how we get from half of North America, the climate of half of North America 10 to 12 to 13, 15,000 years ago was a climate like you now find at the South Pole. I mean, that's not an exaggeration. So if you believe that the climate, that there's some steady state that we're supposed to find, that's what we're supposed to, we're supposed to find this, whatever, what are we trying to do here? Get back to the climate of the 1800s or the early 1900s? People don't know the extent to which climate has changed. So I just mentioned the fact that sea levels rose 400 feet. Well, nobody's in the mainstream is really thinking about that. You have to go to marine geologists. They're talking about it and realizing it. Oceanographers, paleoclimatologists who study ancient climate will tell you, yeah, it's overwhelming that evidence that the climate has changed over and over again, orders of magnitude beyond anything we've seen in the last century or two. That's what most people don't know. They don't know the degree and extent to which the climate has changed naturally without anthropogenic influences, and long before we were driving SUVs and putting carbon dioxide in the atmosphere. The other thing they don't know is that the thermal capture ability, the long wave radiation coming off of the Earth that the carbon dioxide in the atmosphere can capture is limited. It's, in fact, most of the thermal capture is within the first 100 parts per million. And beyond that, it tapers off logarithmically. So that by the time you get to 420 parts per million, what it is right now, it's like a leaky sponge. A lot of the heat that's being, you understand how carbon dioxide works. It creates an envelope around the Earth in the upper atmosphere. It allows the shortwave radiation to come through that's coming from the sun, which is absorbed into the Earth, and then that is re-emitted as long-wave radiation, roughly in the about 14 to 17 micron wavelength. Okay, so it comes back from the Earth. That's what's being captured by carbon dioxide. But most of that within that window is being captured by water vapor. And there is only a limited ability of carbon dioxide to capture heat in that window, right? And imagine, Pat, that you've got a sponge sitting on the table and I take this water and I start pouring into a dry sponge. Well, you're not going to see anything leaking out until the sponge gets saturated. Once it's saturated, I keep pouring, and then what happens? It just keeps leaking out. Well, that's what's happening, is that the heat is now leaking out from the carbon dioxide. Now, we saw a spike, last summer when they were saying, well, this is the hottest month and all that on record. Well, it depends, again, on how you look at the records. I think the records are being biased by the urban heat island because most of the measuring stations are in airports which were rural 50 years ago, 30 years ago, and now they're urban. So they're surrounded by asphalt and concrete and air conditioner condensers and everything that's putting off heat. So that's a whole nother discussion we could have about the bias that I think has found its way into the data about climate change, about warming. But the other thing that happened was this big underwater volcano that went off that disgorged enormous volumes of water vapor.
What's it called?
Hunga Tonga-Hunga. Rob will find it for us. Hunga.
What an interesting name.
Yeah, Hunga Tonga-Hunga, I think is what it was. Hunga.
Oh, there it is. I found it, Rob.
Yeah, there it is. Underwater volcano, erupted. There it is, January 15th. The largest underwater explosion ever recorded by modern instruments, and had a number of effects. One of those effects is that it increased the density of the water vapor canopy, which captured heat. And I think that's what really made that summer exceptionally warm of 2023. In fact, that water vapor is still clearing out. So there's a lot of those things that people just don't know. And you have to like follow the whole controversy to know that kind of stuff.
Rob, can you find a clip of the Hunga Tonga on maybe one of the greatest names for a volcano? Can you find a clip of what this Hunga Tonga did? I found one, but I want to see if you got one here and the effects of it.
Well, let me put it to you this way. The climate change establishment is trying to downplay the effects of it. But there is independent research that pretty much confirms that, yes, that enormous injection of water vapor would have had...
Play that, Rob, on 2.0. If you can play that clip on 2.0 speed. So why are they trying to downplay it, and why do you think it's a bigger deal than what the establishment climate change folks are telling us?
Well, because, again, it points to the idea that the climate changes naturally without help from humans. And the whole climate change narrative is about, I think it's about ultimately using climate change towards social control.
This is what, by the way, Rob, do you remember this at all?
I don't.
I mean, we cover a lot of different issues. I don't ever remember this being a mainstream, like a big story. That's what happened. That's a pretty big deal for something like that to
Absolutely.
take place.
And I think it was deliberately downplayed. I think it was deliberately ignored because, again, I think the strategy now is to focus exclusively on anthropogenic-driven climate change.